Bookwrights House, where we get to know the authors behind the stories we love. Today, we're sitting down with James Needham to talk about the journey, inspirations, and the process of bringing the book to life. Good afternoon, Mr. Needham. I'm Elijah Barcelona, and before we begin, on behalf of Bookwrights House, thank you for being with us today. We're excited to explore your journey and gain insights into your work as an author. So let's dive in. Okay, so what inspired you to write God's Still Calling? Finding God's Fingerprints. Was there a specific moment or event that led to the creation of this book?
Well, there were lots of them, actually. But the most important springboard, if you will, were that my grandchildren were assembled for Thanksgiving in 2017 and said, "Grandpa, what did you do before you met Grandma?" And I said, "Well, lots of things." And I told them some of the things I had done, and they asked for some details, and I shared them, and they said, "Would you write it down, Grandpa?" And I said, "Yes, I would. And if you would read it." And they said, we'll read it. And I thought, uh-oh, I've opened my mouth. Now how do I get that done? And so I did that, but I talked a little bit about Bob Ross, which they knew about because we did all the Bob Ross programs here in Muncie, Indiana. Now they're in 109 countries around the world. But at that time, these young people, all of them, and their later teens, knew about him and knew what he was. And of course, he'd been to our house and some other things. So they were real excited about finding out the backstory for all of that. And I began to respond to something our pastor had said when we were in Florida. And he'd said to us, if you want to communicate with young people, you better start with your grandchildren. Most of the people in this audience have white hair, like you do. And if you want to communicate with them and tell them what you believe, you need to start with them and tell them what you believe and why. So I did. And then I worked with the local museum that agreed to do an interview with me that was an autobiography, literally. And I said, I'll do that if you'll print it out, if you'll transcribe it. And they agreed to do that. So when they finished, they had 120 pages for me, and that's where I began.
So your philanthropic efforts have been widely recognized. So can you share the story behind how you started these charitable initiatives?
This what initiative, please?
Yeah, charitable initiatives, charities, charity works.
Charity work. I've always been involved in charity work. Broadcasters are. I started in Channel 10 in Terre Haute, where the company owns and runs the 500 race in Indianapolis. And I went from there to Canada, where I worked at a university very similar to Purdue University. And I was there for 7 months. Then I moved on to Kentucky, where I was a television producer for 3 years. And I had a great opportunity when I got there to work with the producer who actually was the editor for the Jaws movie, the first Jaws movie, Verna Fields. She was my director. I was working for President Nixon at that time on a special project, which was the first and only White House Conference on Food and Nutrition. We were assigned to Ellsworth, Maine, to a little island off the coast actually called Stonington, the most beautiful place I think I'd ever been by the ocean. But at any event, we were doing that and sending these videos back to the White House every night for 2 weeks. And so I got to meet with her and work with her very closely and had a great experience where she showed me what producers do. I'd never been a television producer at that point, but on the night before Thanksgiving that year, we went out to dinner like we always did after we'd put our videos in the shuttle and sent it to the White House. We'd go to dinner. Well, I had some really bad clams and I got real sick, and about 1:30 in the morning, I had to go to the hospital. And we got to the hospital and the hospital was closed. The lights were out, and the nurse said, "We don't have any doctors. We don't even have any beds." But Verna Fields said, "Oh, wait a second. I've been on situations out in the outback and other places where we've had to make do, and we can't make do without this fellow having some shots from the doctor that allows him to sleep and get rid of all of this stuff so he can work for me tomorrow. Otherwise, he's no good. So you've got to find a bed and you've got to get a doctor in here to give him a shot." And I watched what she did and realized that there are times, including at 1:30 in the morning, when you have difficulties, emergencies, that you have to respond to that. And I worked with her for 2 weeks and learned an awful lot about how you produce television programs from somebody who really knew.
Mhm. So, regarding your faith, um, how does this guide your philanthropic work, or are there any specific scriptures or teachings that serves as your guiding principle?
I think my guiding principle is to do what God shows me in the moment and follow what's in the Bible, and start with being grateful for whatever He gives me.
Mm-hmm.
And while that sounds crazy, it's not. I had a very difficult time in Indianapolis, where I was doing all the things I'd always hoped to do. I was 28 years old, and I had a television show. I had a good job. I was at the top news station in Indianapolis, and I was working a lot. I was one of my jobs was to communicate with all of the non-for-profits in our community, and find out what's going and bring it into the newsroom and into the public affairs programs, and make them available to the public and make them attractive, and be part of that and be the spokesperson for the station to show up at those kinds of meetings and activities and be part of them. And I found I really enjoyed it because what I found out was that television was a lot more than entertainment. And as I went along in my learning curve, I suppose you could call it, I discovered that. When I was in Canada, I did a film on apiculture, which is beekeeping, and the beekeepers in the sister university in Africa were losing all of their bees because they had some kind of bacteria, I think it was. But in any event, we made a video that was similar to one of the videos that we had seen that the National Film Board of Canada had shown to us in the basement of the White House. Believe it or not, we came in there and we watched a video from Canada. But the Canada video was about giving the people that lived on this island in northern Canada an opportunity to stay where they were. And the way that happened was they showed them the video and said, if you can build a business that will give you the income to stay on this island, then you can stay on the island. And it was about making a longliner, which is a kind of boat that was very successful. And then all of a sudden, those boats had disappeared, and they didn't have them, couldn't buy them. And one of the people on the island said, we can make those. And if we make them, we can sell them. If we can sell them, we can stay here. And I looked at that and I thought, television is a lot more than entertainment. It changes lives. And one of the interesting things about that was that when Bob Ross came to our station in 1982, and we watched him after he had sold one of the paintings, the only one I ever helped paint with him, actually, but we were selling, and he called me out and said, come over here and paint with me, and I did. And when we finished that night, we sold it for $550. Of course, they're worth a lot more than that now. But in any event, we walked down to see this woman who was about 85 years old, and she'd come in the stairs to this place where the auction was. And she started up the steps, and when she saw Bob, she started crying. And he ran down to her and hugged her and said, are you all right? And she said, yes, I am, but I just want you to know you're the best part of my day, because I am in constant pain. And when I watch you, I get to relax, and I'm at peace, and I just love to hear your voice, and I love to see what you're doing. And while I don't paint, I watch you and listen to you every day, and when I'm with you, it's the best part of my day. And when she walked away, I said to Bob, do you ever hear that before? And he said, I do, Jim. I hear it all the time, because what I really do is I change people's lives. And that's what television does. It changes people's lives for the better. And Bob was really good at that. Is there a mantra in the Bible or something that guides me? I think it's Philippians 4:4-9, which says, rejoice in the Lord always. It is, I will say it again, rejoice. This is Paul writing to the church at Philippi. In everything, give thanks, for that is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. And when you do that, you will have the peace of God that will abide in you and drive you to do things. And I've learned that's true in every situation if you look for what's right with that. And it's part of the title of my book.
Mm-hmm.
It says, finding God's fingerprints. If you look for God's fingerprints, they're everywhere. And if you don't look for God's fingerprints, what you discover is you're looking for the wrong things. You're not capable of doing a lot of things. God is capable of doing anything. And he does. And some of the stories all of the stories in my book are real and true. but it was something I learned really kind of early on when I had a problem in Indianapolis, and my wife decided that she didn't have enough of my time and went looking and found somebody else and divorced me and married somebody and left me with a bunch of bills. And I thought, what do I do with this? And the answer was, I look at the Bible, I look for the guides that come in the Bible about what is smart and what you're supposed to do. And one of the things was tithing, and I'd never done it before.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided that when she went out and spent a lot of money on new furniture, which she said she deserved, and I had to cut up the credit cards. When she did that, I thought, what can I do? And the answer was, I went to the Bible and I read about it, and we had just finished doing a program with Corrie ten Boom. I don't know whether you know her or not, but she was one of the people that was helping Jews get out of Germany. And when the Germans found that out, they took her whole family from Amsterdam and took them to Auschwitz, and eventually all of them were killed except for Corrie ten Boom, who was released by an accident, a clerical accident. Well, when she came to do my show, she actually brought the film that they had made, The Hiding Place. And I sat with the person who played that role, Jeanette Clift. And having sat with her, I said to her, I know you were not a Christian when you started playing Corrie ten Boom in the movie. What changed that? And she said, well, I watched Corrie ten Boom for a year, and I discovered I really wanted to be more like her than I was. And I just asked her, what can I do to have faith? And Corrie said, well, that's simple. Romans 10:17. That is, faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of God. If you want faith, what you do is open the Bible and you ask God to show you what He's saying to you today, and then you do what He shows you. And I started doing that, and since then I've read through the Bible a number of times, but one of the things was about tithing. And I thought I should do that. I'd never done that. I didn't have enough money to tithe, but I decided I would. And I did something my father had said, always have enough debt that you have to work. And I didn't know that that was my primary means of driving my life, but I wanted to do that. I wanted to be obedient. And I'd been working in Young Life, which I had done as a volunteer when I was at Channel 8. My girlfriend, after I was divorced, gave me books on Corrie ten Boom, and I read about him, and I thought, this is incredible. And then they called me and said, will you have her on your show? And I agreed to do that. So she came with the program, with the film, and so did Jeanette Clift, who played her role. And when I asked that, I said, well, I'll read the Bible then, and I'll ask God to show me what to do. And I started the first of that month, December of that year, to write a check for 10% of my income and put it in the offering plate. I had never done that. I'd never written that big a check to any church ever. But I said, Lord, bless me and help me to figure this out. I can't figure out how to pay all these bills and everything. And the next thing I did was I found a roommate, and I moved in with someone so I could save money and pay my bills. And then I moved again and got to a smaller situation. And as I went through all of that, and I ultimately finished my work with Young Life, I coached 230 kids on how to ski. When I'd never skied before, I coached them on how to get up without taking their skis off, because if you take your skis off and they get loose, they become something that's very deadly. You're going down the hill and nobody's on them. So I did that and learned to ski, which ultimately came back to me. So many of these stories are so tied to my whole life, but it is the story of my life. And later, when I got married again, I got a new job. My job came from the interview program that I was doing that I had Corrie ten Boom on. And when we did that program, actually I met the woman that prayed for me. And you don't know what the story is unless you read the book, but the story that really goes to that is that in August of that year, they started praying for all the stations in Indianapolis because none of us would accept product and service advertising. Mm-hmm. None of them. And so we were asked to do that, and stations all said no. Well, in that meantime, when I started doing things and finding ways to pay my bills, and the ones that my wife had set up for me, I discovered that I could do the programs, and I loved doing the programs. I've been a drama major as an undergraduate at Indiana State, and I've done musicals and summer stock and other things, so I had a lot of background for that kind of thing. But when I got to the end of that year, and I said to myself, I think what I really need is a new job. And I looked around and I found one in Muncie, Indiana, and I applied for it, and they asked me to do an interview. And we were doing the interview, and they said, what is a good community service program? Well, I'd been real tied into all kinds of community programs because of the role I played at Channel 8. And I said, well, you'll need to tune in tomorrow night and watch, because what we have is a group called Here's Life Indianapolis. And in that group, they had it was a group that was doing something that Billy Graham had asked the world to embrace here in America. And they put bumper stickers out that said, I've found it, you can too, and here's a number to call. And if you call, what they'll say to you is, you can find new life in Jesus Christ. Well, in the midst of that process, I had recommitted my life to Christ. I wanted to be what he wanted me to be. In fact, the one thing I did was I said, I want you, Jesus, to sit in the driver's seat, let me sit in the back seat and take me wherever you want me to go, period. And it started with that check that I couldn't believe I wrote until I did. And nothing had changed except I'd found ways to pay my bills. And ultimately, I put that program on. And when I put the program on, after the show was over, and Corey Tindman was well, it wasn't Corey Tindman, it was the Here's Life Indianapolis campaign. But they came on, and when they finished, I took all the materials to Broad Ripple, which is on the north side of Indianapolis, and we went in, and I gave my name, and they said, over here, and I dropped all my materials at the table, and then a woman called out to me and said, Jim Needham, I want to talk to you. And I went over to see her, and I said, did you watch the show? And she said, no, I didn't, but I understand it was really good, and I really appreciate your doing that. And then she explained to me how the stations had all rejected advertising. That was coming from issue-oriented advertising, like they were going to talk about faith in Christ. That's what they were doing. And they had, tens of thousands of people were watching and doing that. And when they watched it from Ball State, where the station was located in Muncie, Indiana, they watched the show, and when they finished, they called me on Monday and offered me the job. So in a very fell swoop, I did what God had shown me to do. I thanked him for everything that happened, even the bad things that are the things I thought were bad things. When I walked into the general manager's office and said, I want a time off at Christmas because I've got a job. I'm going to help 230 high school kids learn to take their skis or get up without taking their skis off. And I did that. And only did I find out later, when I proceeded to come to Muncie and met somebody who was widowed in a plane crash with her 3 kids. The 3 kids survived, her husband did not. And 2 years later, after that, I was skiing with my kids because I'd learned to ski at that volunteer trip. Everything I do, everything I've done really comes together with the hand of God and the fingerprints of God all over them. And if you read the book and you see it begins with the book begins with my disobedience. I was a strong-willed child, unfortunately. Or fortunately, there were good things and bad things, but I was a strong-willed child and fought with my parents all the time because I have an older brother who was perfect, who got straight A's. I did not get straight A's, but I got into trouble doing all kinds of things that were told not to do. And I had a lot of fun. I wanted to be entertained. I wanted to find out about things I didn't know about. And I did things I was told not to do, unfortunately. But I think the thing that I did most was I read the Bible. I trusted it. I ultimately was baptized when I was a small child, and then I was baptized again at 13, and then I was baptized at 21, and I was baptized one more time. Actually, when we went to Israel in 2010, and we went to the Jordan River with a priest who was named John Keeper, and we got to the Jordan River, and he said, we're going to get baptized. And I said, really? What's that? He said, well, roll up your pants to your knees and we're all going to walk into the Jordan and I'm going to baptize you. Well, he stopped along the way and grabbed sticks of hyssop, which is what they used to give Jesus the vinegar when he was on the cross. And he walked into the Jordan and he turned around and he said, I want you all out here. Come on out, walk out till your knees are covered with water. And we did. And all of a sudden he reached the hyssop down in the water and he sprayed us again and again. And he was laughing, and finally he threw the hyssop into the Jordan River, and then he turned around and took a swim, believe it or not. The Jordan was cold. But so I've been baptized more than I need to be, I think. But in the process, I've come to be a believer because I see God answering my prayers, and I've learned to believe because of strange things that have happened, including when I was 12 years old and my dad had gotten to the point where he couldn't walk anymore. He had back problems that were terrible. And my mom called us into the room or the bedroom where he'd been for a month and said we were going to pray for Dad because they've got a chiropractor coming. And we said, what's that? And he said, you'll see. And well, he showed up and my dad crawled into the living room and he got onto this portable couch and the chiropractor said, Fred, you're going to be able to walk again. Well, he hadn't walked for a month. He crawled into the bathroom and to the toilet and we'd watched that, and we were all crying as we were kneeled around that bed and cried and prayed for him and said, Lord, we just need a miracle. Just a small miracle would be a good thing. And we watched from the living room door while the chiropractor punched my dad and pulled his arms and pulled his legs, and the joints popped and everything. And my dad winced every time he did that. And finally he said, now, Fred, I'm going to have you turn around and sit up. He said, I can't do that. And he said, you can with me. And he did sit up. And the guy put his arms around my dad's arms around his neck, and he said, now I'm going to stand up with you. And he said, I can't do that. He said, you can do that with me. And he ultimately walked him into the bedroom, and he said, I want you in my office on Monday afternoon, and you're going to be able to walk after you get out of the car at my office. And he did that. And after about 2 weeks of chiropractic adjustments, he was able to go back to work again. And I have never forgotten that because it was a miracle, having seen him crawl to the bathroom for a month and not knowing where the money was coming from because there weren't the kind of supports that we needed as a family. He was a chemist. My mother didn't work. We had 4 children. I saw that happen and I thought, my golly, we didn't even know what that was, but for us it was a miracle. You know, it's not a miracle unless it happens to you and you've never seen it before and you never believed it could happen until it does. And I mean, there's so many of those things. At the beginning of our marriage, Linda's and my marriage, we went on what's called the approval tour. That's what I called it. Her husband had been killed in a plane wreck where he was the pilot, but I wasn't on that wreck. I was just somebody who came along and met her and really fell in love with her actually by shoveling crushed limestone for a garden party because she was part of the Dental Wives group. And so we went to visit a friend of theirs in Fort Wayne who was a surgeon, a dentist that was in South Bend, and an OBGYN who was in Kalamazoo. And we got to the Kalamazoo and we ended up at Lake Michigan. And Kirsten came up to me, my fifth grader at that time, and she wasn't mine yet. But she said something was so powerful. She said, Dad, trying that word out for the first time ever. I'm not a father. I never had any children until I came and met Linda. And all of a sudden I had 3, 5, and well, actually 5, 8, and 10, because she was 10. They were 3, 5, and 8 when Steve was killed, Linda's husband. And so she said, would you hold my retainer? And I put it in my pocket. And we had lunch at a picnic table in the sand. And we got up and Brian wanted to go romp in the waves because he was 3 years old and his 8 and 10-year-old brother and sister were already out there. And Linda said, it's too high for that. You got to go out there with them. So I went out there and we jumped up and down in the waves. And she came back and said, Dad, can I have my retainer? And I reached for it. And of course I put it in a napkin in my pocket and it was gone. And Linda said, well, we've got an uncle who's a dentist. He can replace that retainer. And I said, well, yeah, but you don't understand. She trusted me with something really important to her. It was a status symbol that she was the only one in her class with a retainer. And I lost it. And she said, well, what do you propose? And I looked at the water and I said, the water's moving to the north here. It's got to be in the water. And she said, great, the largest of the Great Lakes, and you want to look in the water. I said, look, God knows where it is. I know God knows where it is. We know that, don't we? She said, yes. And I said, well, we're going to look for it, and we're going to pray that God will show us where it was. And so she said, you're crazy. I said, I know that, but let's do it anyway. And so this is sort of something that's happened again and again. And in my book, there's probably 30 or 40 instances of this kind of thing, from the runaway in Virginia who got in her car and drove until she ran out of gas, and we stopped and went back and said, are you okay? And she said, I don't know, the car just stopped. So I drove her car. Actually, I drove back and got gasoline, took the gas back to her car, helped her get to the gas station, started to pump it, and realized she only has 3 $1 bills, no credit card, no food, no luggage or anything. And I said, so there's a problem here. So we called the police while I'm slow walking the gasoline into her car. I'd gotten the car started because it was out of gas. And we stayed until the matron and the police officer came and talked to her, and talked to her son, who was the medical director at the nursing home in Virginia, where she had grabbed her keys, decided she would drive back home to Illinois. Should we have done that? Well, my wife kept saying, what are you doing? She's gone. She's gone. She's not over the next hill. She's gone. We're not going to find her. What are you doing? This is 11 o'clock at night. It's already dark out there. Look, they're going to jump our car or something. All kinds of warnings and stuff, which were all wrong. She was out of gas. She was lost. She was running away. And her son didn't know where she was. And when they found out, they came the next day and got the car and took her back. But that happened again and again and again. And then the other thing we did, I don't have children, as I told you, except the ones I've adopted. I had adopted these because they wanted to keep Steve's last name, so it's Slavin, not Needham. And so I did that, and other times. But back to the retainer, we walked and walked and walked for an hour. Well, not an hour. About 100 and well, it was 35 minutes actually, but about a mile and a half, I would say, down the beach. And all of a sudden, Linda dropped my hand and picked up the retainer and said, "There it is." And we ran back to the beach, ran back to the picnic table, and screaming. And I don't think our feet met the ground at all, because, I mean, it was a miracle. How did that happen? How could you find a retainer that's light pink with a wire in a lake that's 300 miles long and 150 miles wide? How does that happen? And then the last story in the book, I'll be a spoiler. The last story, we have a granddaughter now who was married to my grandson Ben, who was Steve's youngest, and that was the one that was out jumping in the waves. And she and her intended, who was married last December, they went, I don't know whether they went skinny dipping or what they did, but they did something. And they put all their stuff, they said, down on a blanket, and they went in the water. Well, when she came out, they lost her phone. In Hilton Head. They lost it on the beach in Hilton Head at Surfwatch. And this was on Wednesday. We had torrential rains Thursday and Friday, where we had 6-7 inches of water in the parking lots. And we knew it was really bad out. And I didn't know at that time that the phone had been lost with her driver's license. She was turning 21 the next Tuesday. Her room key, her card, her charge card, and she was bereft, but she didn't know what to do. This is the daughter of a pastor, so what did she do? She called her father. Her father said, "I'll order a new phone. You just lost your phone." That was not very smart. And they didn't do anything, and they didn't tell us until Saturday, after these 2 days of torrential rain. And I went down as soon as I heard it, and I said, Did you pray and ask God to show you where the phone was? She laughed and she said, "No, but my dad pinged it again and again, and we knew that he was seeing it, but we couldn't see it and we couldn't hear it. So we're just going to go with the new phone that he's ordered." I said, "Why don't we just stop for a minute and pray and ask God to show us where your phone is on the beach?" It's a deep beach. It's about 100 yards deep. That's where they lost it. So I said, well, we got to pray. And we prayed and asked God to show us where it was, just like the retainer 45 years earlier. And, you do these things and God answers the prayer. And I don't know exactly why he does it, but I do know this. when miracles happen, one of the most important things you can do is you can honor God by pointing to him and saying, he's the one that did it. I didn't do this. He's the one that did it. The same way my mother and father would have pointed to the school that they helped start in Honduras. When they were 67, my father had had 2 massive heart attacks. And they went down there, and if you'd ask them today, the school that now has over 200, well, not 200, 150 kids in it, started with 20, went down there as a faith walk, actually, to do this. And they did it, and anyway, the long story short, with Kaylin, she went and talked to the fellow that was out there with the magnetometer and said, if you could only find that and get that back to me, I would really appreciate it. We're going to give you some money. And he said, I live in one of these big houses down by the breakwater, and I don't need money. I just do this for fun. And so she went and talked to him anyway, and when he said, what was so important that you lost? She said, I lost my driver's license, and I'm 21 next Tuesday. He said, oh my God, then it's an emergency. And she said, well, yeah, but my dad's ordered a new phone. I'll be all right. And so she went back to him, and he started looking in earnest and actually found the phone about 15 minutes later. His name was Mark. He walked back to the place where they were sitting, and they said, what happened? Where did you find that? And he said, well, I just kept looking, and all of a sudden there it was. No, I've never found a phone before, but I'm glad to give it to you. And he said, is there anything you can do for the people sitting there, my son and daughter-in-law and other people? And he said, well, is that a cooler with beer in it? He said, yeah. Would you like a beer? He said, yeah. So they sat there and talked about it. And about 30 minutes later, we're sitting up in the condo where we're just relaxing, my wife and I. And I'd gone to the woman by the beach who was in a cult, and she said, I don't pray, but I know people who do. I'll call them. And when I said we'd lost the phone, and it was really important. And then I went to the office at the resort, and I told them what had happened. I said, if you could find it, we'll pay you to send it home. And then I went up to see Linda, and about 30 minutes later, Kaylin, the one who'd lost the phone, came up and knocked on the door and said, you'll never guess what happened. Mark came up, he found it, he gave it to me, and I went, I couldn't believe it, that we'd found it, that we'd actually found it in the ocean. And I said, you never know what God's going to do. And I went and I told her the story, because she hadn't heard the story of Kirsten's retainer way back in 1967 when we did that. It was the same kind of thing. But the most important part of those things, those miracles, is when I went to All Y'all's, which was the beach bar. Kids were eating potato chips and French fries and hamburgers and stuff. And I said, you have to know what happened. And what happened was, Kaylin lost her phone. Oh yeah, we all know that. Well, what you don't know is it was found again. Really? How did that happen? And I said, well, we prayed about it. We asked God to show us where it was. You did what? Yeah, that's what we did. And nobody had ever found a phone here before, but we found it. And the most important thing you need to know is when you pray and ask for God to hear you and ask for his help, he hears your voices, he hears your prayers, and he helps you. And this has happened so many times. There's Kirsten when she was at Indiana University and was at homecoming and said, well, you have to walk a long way to get to the restaurant we're going to have, but it's the best restaurant in town. And so they walked in, and I walked in right after them, and Kirsten said, what happened? Where did you park? And I said, right out front, where God gave me the spot. People in front of me just pulled away, and I pulled in. Is that an accident? I really did pray. I've done a lot of that, and the kids always laugh, but they say, Dad's praying for parking spaces again, and who does he think he is? But the truth is, again and again and again, I find them. And I think the miracle is that when you ask God for help, when you find it, your job is to tell other people about that. And that's what my book does. It tells other people about the miracles that have come to my life, and they don't sound like much, and they're not much unless they happen to you. And people say, that couldn't have happened. But it did. And when they're there, this is what happened with Lazarus. When Lazarus walked out of the tomb, the most important part of that story is this. Not that he was alive, but when he walked out of that tomb and everybody there knew he'd been dead for 4 years, they all knew that Jesus was the Messiah. They couldn't deny it. And in an oil-oriented culture like they're in, they had to tell people. You can't walk away from that and say, Lazarus was dead for 4 days. We were there at the tomb and you could smell it. It was awful. Jesus came and said, I loved it. He wept. And he says, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus comes forth. And the miracle wasn't that he was raised from the dead. The miracle was all of those people who came as non-believers have been transformed because they knew that only Jesus could have done what Jesus did. When we do things, when we pray and we ask for help, when we log on to things, when we lob on to things that people have said. Mary Neal, who told the story at our church in Florida when we were down there, and said, I was under the waterfall for 20 minutes. We'd been kayaking, and I was under there for 20 minutes, and I was dead, and I wasn't breathing. And my husband came and got me out. He pulled me out at 20 feet down in the water, and I was full of water, and they pumped my lungs, and all of a sudden I started breathing. I still wasn't doing that on my own, but all of a sudden they said, we've got to get her out of here. So we used a kayak, and they used it like something to carry me on, and they were carrying me out to the road, and we're in the middle of nowhere down in Peru, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, not a hospital, but it was an ambulance showed up in the middle of nowhere. Now, she'd broken several of her bones. She was an orthopedic surgeon. Her husband was also an orthopedic surgeon. They'd been carrying her for a while. They put her in the back of the ambulance, took her to the main town there. They flew her back to the largest city there close by, and then they flew her back to Los Angeles. Ultimately, she was healed of her broken bones, and none of her brain or other important organs were destroyed, and she's working in Wyoming now. She came and talked to our church and said, this is what happened to me. And I talked to other people that have had the same situation. When I was at Channel 8, I actually talked to the guy that wrote the first book on life after life. And I did it because I was making fun of it, and my office mate finally said, why are you making fun of him? And I said, well, he's bogus. He's just trying to sell books. And she said, no, he's not. That happened to me. I was in surgery for my kidneys, and I was down for 20 minutes, and they said, when I was down for 20 minutes, things happened. And when I came back, when they brought me back, I was able to tell them exactly what happened. It happened to me, Jim. That happens. People do come back. And God uses that. He uses it to grow our faith. And that's what this book is about. It's about growing faith and helping us to know that when we ask God to get involved in our lives and change things, He does. He does.
So, the lesson that you want to leave the readers is to let God take control and, to surrender. So you trust that challenges have purpose, and even uncertainty, a greater plan is at work, and faith leads the way when the path is unclear. Okay, so with that, can you show us your physical book?
Sure, of course.
Okay. So what advice would you give to aspiring authors who want to write about faith or spirituality?
I would say write about the truth, write about your own experiences, write about what God is doing in your life. Look for Him, what He's doing, and give Him thanks. The most important thing, my verse is, in everything give thanks, for that is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Even this thing here, this is actually Iona, where the Book of Kells was created. And this is my wife, Linda, and unfortunately I didn't tell anybody that, but she was there. We were there. We were there to see the monastery that they put together in 563 AD and put together the first Bible that was written in the local language. And they did that, and they created monasteries all along the west coast of Scotland, and also there in the Outer Hebrides, which is where Iona, which is this island, this Iona. This is the Celtic cross, of course, and that they created. And then in I think it's 799, the Vikings came to wanted to destroy this Christian enclave that had been built by these 12 monks and chase them away. Well, they sort of did that. They chased them out of the islands. What they did is they went into France and Belgium and Switzerland and planted missionaries, planted monasteries all over Europe. That's how those monasteries developed in inner Europe. These monks had been chased away by the Vikings who intended to destroy Christianity. All they did was spread it. and you go back and you read this, you read the Bible, the books that they had used, and people are worshiping there again. And what you see is they're back to basics, Christian basics about trusting God and giving thanks in all things. Even when you don't understand what's happening and you say that this can't happen. This can't be. The truth is it can be. And I think back to things that aren't in the book where I fought with my mother about a pencil that I put through my cheek right here. And for 20 years I had a gray spot right here where I'd pushed this into my mouth with a sharpened pencil. And my mother said, I was trying to keep you from putting your eye out. And then I cried with her too. Anyway, a lot of stories about things, but God has been so faithful to me and my family. My mother was a Cushman, and Robert Cushman preached the first sermon in America in 1621 and was the person who negotiated with King James to actually give them a right to come here and plant Plymouth. And he went back and left his son Thomas here, who became a minister and assigned all of the ministers in the New England enclave there for the next 50 years before he died. So we've had the Cushmans, my mother's side, in this country ever since they populated Plymouth and New England. And I'm really proud of that. But there's a lot more than that. I have stories in there about Elkanah. Elkanah was the son of Thomas Cushman that is the branch of the Cushmans that my family is from. And Elkanah also is the husband of Hanina, that's not right. Hanina was the woman that was the wife that wasn't barren. Hannah was the mother of Samuel, the first child. Hannah was barren until she prayed for a child and finally had a child, and it was a boy child. And she committed him to the priesthood when he was 3 and weaned. And then, having had that experience, the husband said, you should do whatever you think is right for you, and our family does that. But the other thing, the blessing that comes from doing what God shows you to do, is that they had 5 more children, 3 boys and 2 girls, because they were faithful. And you see this, and as you read the Bible, you discover that there's all kinds of examples in here of things that have happened. People, we have children. I don't have any children, but I have one from California, one from Korea, one from India, one from China, one from Denmark, and one from Germany, and one from the east side of Muncie, which is a very poor area for. It was an enclave for the African Americans in Muncie for a long time. And you see all of that, and one of the things I didn't do was, I did. This is one of my kids. You can see he's African American. He just finished at Florida International University after I mentored him for 9 years. Is he mine? Well, in lots of ways, yeah. I've just spent an awful lot of time with him. As I wrote the book, I actually mentored him and got him through Ball State. He got a bachelor's degree. He just finished at Florida International University as a master's degree with honors. You can see he's got the honor course. He also was in the military, and that helped pay his way. So I have a bunch of kids that call me dad who are not my own progeny, but I just found out that loving God and trying to give what you have to other people is the most important thing you can do in life. And beyond that, I do communion at my church for about 25 people a month who can't get to church. And I go and see them, and I have a little cold right now because I was giving communion a couple of weeks ago and got it from two different people. I know who they were, and it's an unforced error, but it's part of the risk that you take when you go out and try and help other people. You can't imagine what that means to them when they can't get out of bed and they get to have communion and pray with them. It's transformative. And the most important thing that I'm doing is learning. And from a 101-year-old woman, as I asked her, I said, what can I pray for you for? And she said, I have everything I need. I'm not sick or anything. Pray that I will be grateful for what God has given me at this point in my life instead of what I don't have anymore. And that would be enough.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stories in there. They're all good. Love is the only thing there is. I've said it before. I didn't really read it, but you read it in the book if you get the book. Love is the only thing there is that the more you give away, the more you have. I was a counselor at Ball State. There were 1,200 students in our TCOM, which is like media department. And I would problem solve. I love doing that. I was a psychology major as an undergraduate and a graduate student. And ended up getting into television and all kinds of things. But it's been the great adventure of my life. And I guess what I want them to communicate is to get this message from my friend Virginia Ball. Virginia was a great friend of mine and part of the Ball family that did the Ball canning jars. And when she had a stroke in Little Cayman, she went back to Grand Cayman to fly back to Tampa to find out what had happened. And a friend of ours who had been scuba diving, I'm a scuba diver. There you go. There's what I was like when I was 50. Yeah, I was getting wet. And I went to Little Cayman after that. But she said, they called and said, how are you doing, Virginia? And she said, you know what? I don't know for sure, but I'm on my next great adventure. And I want to look at life and what's left of life for me. I'm 80 years old as a great adventure. And I'm going to see God's fingerprints everywhere because I know they're there. I see them everywhere, even in this conversation today. And I thank you for spending time with me and giving me an opportunity to tell my story. And I was going to tell my story about my dad, but I won't because I don't have time for it. But I can show this to you, and I'm just going to show this to you. You can't see it, but anyway, this is my dad's writing. I've never read this before, but the mission they put together and it ended up being a school on Utila, Honduras, which is the westernmost of the 5 Bay Islands there, which is now a scuba diving mecca. They were scared to death because my dad had 2 massive heart attacks right before they went. And he said, I laid in bed for 10 weeks and I discovered that I had never really put my life in God's hands, and I really wanted to, but I just had never done that. And so they took off on this adventure, which they said was D-Day, because they had to trust God that everything was going to work out. And it not only worked out, it was fantastic. It went from 20 kids to 150 of them, and it continues today. And it transformed people's lives. Kids went, adults went. I had people last week ask if they were going to go back and help do things to benefit the island and all of the people there. It's just my dad. So I'm doing one of the things my dad did and take the risk. And he said, one of the things that shocked me is when I came back to Sherwin-Williams, where I worked after I'd been off for about 10 weeks. Came back and 12 of my friends had died of heart attacks. And I asked myself, why did God let me live through these 2 heart attacks and all those other men and women die? And he said, I wasn't really sold out to Jesus, but I am now. And then I spent 10 years in the island of Utila trying to do things that people said they didn't need and they didn't want until they got ready to get on the plane and the parents came to them with this little plane that was on a 2,200-foot runway, and said, Mr. Fred, Miss Jeanette, that's what they do on that island, is, would you please come back and teach our kids? We need you, and they need you. They need the college education you can get them ready for that they can't get from these 2 high school graduates from England. We need real teachers. Will you come back? my parents did. I got to watch all of this, and to recognize that it's not my hand, it's not my parents, it's God working through them. And if I claim that, it's my mistake. It's God working through me and other people. As I go away, I'm going to go away shortly on a visit to Florida, but and I don't have anyone to replace me and take the communion to the 28 or 29 people we have on our list for the month I'm gone. And I'm sad about that. I don't want to get another cold, but I will go back to see him. I mean, I will. I trust God, and I know that He's going to give me every day I'm meant to have. And that's one of the things the Bible says. In Psalm 139, it says, before you were formed in your mother's womb, I numbered all of your days. If that's true, I don't have to worry at all about what's coming. I don't. And I don't worry about that. So I know what's coming. And it's way better than what we have. Truly.
Mr. Needham, it's been a pleasure learning about your journey and your work. And I wish you all the best in your future projects. And may your stories continue to inspire readers everywhere. So, to our viewers, we hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as we have. And until next time, you keep turning the pages, keep telling stories, and we'll see you again here at Bookwrights House. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really a very touching story because I also am a devoted Catholic, and I'm also a volunteer at our church. So I can really relate to what you've said. And yes, I volunteered to our church because I too experienced a lot of miracles from God. So yeah, I'm here today at work, and I woke up early just to. I think yes, this is
If you look for Him, you'll see His fingerprints everywhere.
yes.
You will. And that's a blessing.
Mhm.
And that also inspires you to tell other people about it. Really.
Yes, Mr. Needham.
It'll fill your cup. God bless you.
That's
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Have a great day ahead.
You too.